Ave Maris Stella.
Hello and welcome back to Vatican II in a Year. This is your host, Father Matthew Schneider. I am a priest of the Church of Christ, and I teach theology. This is a podcast on the Star Christ Production Network at sqpn.com. Today, we're on day 231. We're covering Dignitatis Humanae 3 on how humans come to divine truth. If you want to follow along, we have a reading plan and more details at sqpn.com/Vatican or frmatthewlc.com/Vatican. Yesterday, we spoke about how religious freedom is based on dignity as images of God and spiritual beings, and the law should respect this. Today, we're going to get a little philosophical. I want to apologize in advance. This is probably one of the more philosophical, one of the more difficult to understand ones. One of the concepts we're going to talk about today is one of the more difficult concepts when I've taught fundamental moral theology or introduction to moral theology to men studying to be permanent deacons, and I'll try and explain it as best I can to you, and hopefully you all understand it. So we're going to talk about each must seek natural laws of participation in eternal law in their conscience, and they should be free to do so. And we're going to talk about the erroneous conscience, which is the very difficult philosophical problem. So paragraph 3 has 5 subparagraphs, but paragraph C is like super short and B isn't that long either. So I'm going to do them together. So A tells us that God made the divine plan we discover and make the natural law. B and C talk about we must ascend to truth and can help each other seek it out. So that helping each other seek it. D, it talks about man discovers God's eternal laws as conscious and no human power can constrain him. And then E is about society should show favor to religions. So let's get straight into A on the divine, eternal, and natural law. I'll read it and then I'll explain. So let's read. 3a. Further light is shed on the subject if one considers the highest norm of human life is the divine law, eternal, objective, universal, whereby God orders, directs, and governs the entire universe, and all the ways of human community by a plan conceived in wisdom and love. Man has been made by God to participate in this law, with the result that, under the gentle disposition of divine providence, he can come to receive ever more fully the truth that is unchanging. Wherefore, every man has the duty, and therefore the right, to seek the truth in matters religious, in order that he may, with prudence, form himself right and true judgments of conscience under the use of all suitable means. So a big concept here is the idea of divine law, natural law, and eternal law. Divine law is the law in the divine mind, what it has in God, how God has the ordering in his own mind, which is the ultimate truth of reality. Then second, we have eternal law, which is God putting this law into reality. As we see that animals reproduce to increase their species, gravity works, how all the structures work for life, both physical and spiritual here. And then we have natural law. And natural law is defined by Aquinas as the participation in the eternal law by the rational creature. So what we mean by that, which sounds a little confusing, is that we grasp what is true in reality, what is true in the eternal law that God put into reality. And from grasping that, we're able to get the natural law. And the natural law is that which is not revealed. It's that which we can get through reason alone. If we look at almost every culture in history, there are certain things that are pretty universal. For example, in every single culture, female genitals are covered. In every single culture, killing members of the tribe, at least, without justification, like as a punishment for murder or something like that, is forbidden. And things like that we have from the natural law, something innate in human beings telling us certain moral things, which we have, which all cultures have. So that is the reality of what we mean by natural law. And this goes back to De Filius Vatican I, and it talked about how we can understand God through reason alone without revelation, but we can also understand things about ourselves, things about what is right and wrong, the nature of man, things like that, through reason alone. And that's what we get through natural law. And so this God's divine law is the highest form of life. And it's not just the natural law, but it's also the revealed law. We have sometimes you'll see it put different terms there, but this idea of that revealed law that comes from the Bible. It's not natural law. It's what comes from the Bible. The Bible tells us we need to be baptized to receive Jesus' salvation. Natural law doesn't tell us that. Natural law tells us that God exists and there is something that we should do to worship him, to indicate we are part of him, but it doesn't say if the ceremony is supposed to be baptism or is supposed to be burning a certain type of incense before a certain kind of statue or something like that. It tells us that there must be some ceremony towards the divine, but it doesn't tell us what that ceremony is. God reveals that instead. We have that as the revealed law. And so when we understand both the natural and revealed law, we can follow through with our full plan, because that gives us a plan of human life, the highest form of human life, following the natural law, following that revealed law, and leads us towards heaven, leads us towards the resurrection. And the challenge here is that each person is going to grasp this natural law, the eternal law, in different degrees through the natural law. If you're in a society where every rich guy has a concubine, the natural law thing of marital fidelity and that being part of the natural law, which it is, might get obscured by your culture's bad practices of allowing rich and powerful men to have concubines. And that's the kind of thing that can be an obstacle to it. So each person must be given the freedom to impose it, because it needs to be imposed by truth, not imposed by external. Now, obviously, as we'll talk about, we can help people understand it. We should help people understand the natural law. We should explain it to them, but we can't impose it. So B and C are about this helping each other out. We must assent to truth, and we can help each other seek it out, is the summary. So let's read it. 3b. Truth, however, is to be sought after in a manner proper to the dignity of human person and his social nature. This inquiry is to be free, carried out with the aid of teaching or instruction, communication, dialogue, in the course of which men explain to one another the truth they have discovered or they think they have discovered, in order thus to assist one another in the quest for truth. C. Moreover, as the truth is discovered, it is by personal assent that men are to adhere to it. We have a human way of seeking the truth. Angels just know the truth. They don't need to seek it. God knows the truth. But humans, we have a kind of way to seek it from things we know to logical conclusions. For example, if I know that John is a man, and I know from other sources that all men are mortal, I could say John is mortal. If I know that John is married to Jane, I know that John should be faithful to Jane, because I can work that out as the proper thing for marriage. And we don't just know that instantly. We have this rational, linear way to go about discovering the truth. We go from premises to conclusions. And we need that free inquiry to seek it out. But that free inquiry shouldn't just be throwing each person to their own whims and fancy. No, we should give them instruction. We should help them seek it out. And the church does a lot of that, and the church should continue to do that. We have CCD that should help people understand, hey, this is the truth about God. Here's the truth about ethics. Things like that. And honestly, we need help with the truth in various things, because none of us can have 10 PhDs in 10 different fields. It's just not possible. So I need to rely on people who have PhDs and decades of research in a certain field to better understand it. So I can understand at least a level where maybe I can do ethics on that. Right? But I'm moral theology professor primarily. And so like my research and writing is often questions about bioethical or technological ethics. And I have to rely on the people who are experts in that to give the reality of biology or of technology. And I can't just be such an expert that I know all the details on my own. I can't do all that research on my own. I have to rely on others. And we must assent personally. Even though we have help, each person needs to assent. Each person needs to do that. We can't do that for anybody else. No matter how much everybody would love for their kids, hey, I'm going to assent to their good truth and you're all going to be perfect Catholics. That's just not how it works. And I know that's very painful for some parents, but it's reality. So that is B and C. Let's move to D. The summary is that man discovers God's eternal law as his conscience, and no human power can constrain him. So let's read it. D. On his part, man perceives and acknowledges the imperatives of the divine law through the mediation of conscience. In all his activity, a man is bound to follow his conscience in order that he may come to God, the end and purpose of life. It follows that he is not to be forced to act in a manner contrary to his conscience. Nor, on the other hand, is he to be restrained from acting in accordance with his conscience, especially in matters religious. The reason is that the exercise of religion, of its very nature, consists before all else in those internal, voluntary and free acts whereby man sets the course of his life directly toward God. No merely human power can either command or prohibit acts of this kind. The social nature of man, however, itself requires that he should give external expression to his internal acts of religion, that he should share with others matters religious, that he should profess his religion in community. Inquiry, therefore, is done to the human person and to the very order established by God for human life. If the free exercise of religion is denied in society, provided just public order is observed. So, we noted before how natural law is the understanding of eternal law, and each person does it individually. Now, each person does this in their conscience, and their conscience is what tells them the truth, and they must follow their conscience. Dan must follow a sure conscience, even if it's erring, because if your conscience is sure, you would not know it was erring. And so it is the voice of God, but it is somehow muddled, so you think, for example, maybe Zeus is really God, and so you're offering incense to Zeus or something like that. Just like, imagine if a friend came over to your house, and in your house you have a rule that you have to take off your shoes when you come inside. But most of the other people in town don't. Well, you can't really blame your kid's friend for not taking off his shoes unless somebody told that friend, hey, you take off your shoes in this house. The same way with this, we can't expect people, and in fact, these people do good and actually implicitly worship the true God when they worship their deceived version of God. And that's a challenge. So that is a challenge in this. This is one of the more challenging things to understand in Introduction to Moral Theology, Fundamental Moral Theology, whatever you want to call that class, is that idea that we have to follow erring conscience if it's sure. Now, obviously, if you're unsure and you're not sure if it's right or not, it might be erring, well, you should check it out. And obviously, this is combined with a duty to seek the truth. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to sleep with my girlfriend and I'm going to avoid looking at anything to find out if that's right. And that's because that's not really following conscience truly. And this conscience directs us towards religion. We can't restrain it. We can't force someone to have a conscience this way or that way. We can form it, as we noted in B and C there, but we can't force it. And finally, this section, D, talks about how this becomes active in communal actions. Man has a social nature. And so freedom of religion is not just, hey, I can do this thing in the abstract, but hey, I can go forth and do this thing in a practical way. And so it involves also that external practice of religion from the internal practice of religion. So paragraph 3E is a little bit of a distinction because it's talking about how society should show favor to religion. Let's read it. E. There is a further consideration, the religious acts whereby men, in private and in public, out of a sense of personal conviction, direct their lives to God, transcend by the very nature the order of terrestrial and temporal affairs. Government, therefore, ought indeed to take account of the religious life of its citizenry and show favor, since the function of the government is to make provision for the common welfare. However, it would truly transgress the limits of its set to its power were it to presume, command, or inhibit acts that are religious. So the religion directs our lives to these higher things. It transcends this temporal reality. It transcends the here and now, and it is our ultimate good. And society, government should be concerned for our good. But the government can't force religion. However, it can give positive review to religion in how it does it because this is a good thing. And this is how even a Protestant religion favoring, even things like, for example, in the U.S. House of Congress, every session is started with a prayer. And this prayer is done by all different people, by Catholics, by Protestants, sometimes by Jews or Muslims or Hindus or things like that. And that's a good thing. It's showing that religion is important in society. even if it's not always Catholic, even if it's a Protestant giving the prayer, or even if it's a pagan like a Hindu giving the prayer. Now, obviously, the proportion of each is about proportionate to their share of the population. So most of the ones who do it are Protestant, and then the probably second biggest group are Catholic. Depending on how, if you want to subdivide Protestant, then maybe Catholics are even the biggest. Depending on how you talk about Protestants as one monolithic or as a bunch of different subgroups. And this is good because people direct their lives towards heaven, and government is limited. They can't force it, but they can promote it, remind people that it is a good for them. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening to this episode of Vatican II in a Year. This is a listener-supported podcast, and you can do it to help StarQuest produce it and other great podcasts at sqpn.com/give. You can give one-time monthly or join the StarQuest Patreon. Tomorrow we're going to continue the next paragraphs in Dignitatis Humanae 4-5 on communal life and familial religious liberty. Please join us then to learn more about Vatican II, which provide a blueprint for the Catholic Church. For more information on the podcast, such as playlists for individual documents and a reading plan, go to sqpn.com/Vatican, frmatthewlc.com/Vatican, or Vatican SQPN on Facebook and X.
Amen.